This is Martin Giles of the Guildford Dragon News, and I'm now with Sam Peters, who was the candidate for the Green Party in the recent Surrey County Council election in the Shear division, and is also the coordinator for Surrey Green Parties. Welcome to the Guildford Dragon, Sam.
Thanks, Martin.
Now, you only stood in the Green Party, with you as the candidate, only stood in one of the Guildford divisions. That was the one in Shear, as we've said. Why was that? Because the result in Shear has been thoroughly discussed, and most would agree that, rightly or wrongly, the split non-Tory vote allowed them to retain that seat. But you have said you've no regrets. So why is it that you only chose that seat to stand in?
Well, our local party is the Guildford and Waverley Green Party. So including Waverley into that, we stood in 3 seats. The reason we didn't stand, a whole slate of candidates across the whole of Guildford is that we were collaborating with the Lib Dems to avoid splitting the progressive vote across the area. We agreed areas in which not to stand against them and vice versa. And this collaboration was based on a common platform of policies, mainly organised by Compass, which includes members of the Green Party, the Lib Dems, Labour, and also residents and independents, not just national political parties. And this platform covers all areas that are important to local councils and local residents, from social care, education, waste, public transport, anything like that. So the intention was always to avoid splitting the progressive vote based on these common policies that we do have agreements with other candidates and other parties, and that's why it happened to be that in Guildford we only stood in one of the seats. In other areas we've stood in many more seats. In Waverley we had another 2 candidates there.
Okay,
but that's the reason.
But in Shear, you split the vote with another party, the Guildford Greenbelt Group, which did, whilst there's lots of differences between the 2 parties, on environmental issues and local environmental issues, there's a lot of overlap. So why couldn't you come to an agreement with them there?
Well, as our coordinator, Mark Bray-Parry, has written, he did approach the Guildford Greenbelt Group, GGG, and was told in no uncertain terms there would be no collaboration of any kind. And it is, it is a shame. And the idea, generally speaking, is to be the point of this is to try and take seats from the Conservatives. But really, where there's so much of a lack of that other policy, the common policies that I was talking about with other parties there, that realistically there's not that much, aside from the Greenbelt issues that we obviously agree on, there's really not that much similarity between the 2 parties. The interview with Ramsey Nagati, where he sort of scoffed at Green Party policies on social issues, proof enough of that. Aside from the fact that there's many residents now represented by a GGG councillor at Guildford Borough Council who face these issues themselves every day, the idea that these very basic rights are only issues of concern at a national level and that local people shouldn't care about them is one that I definitely don't agree with, let's say. Okay,
but you seem to accept that under the first past the post system, it is important for the opposition parties to negotiate and cooperate if the dominant party, which here is the Conservative Party, but isn't everywhere in the country, is to be successfully challenged. So isn't it important actually for you to work harder, not just you, but all the other parties, to form these alliances?
Unfortunately, yeah. It's collaboration is great, and collaboration between parties is great, but we would like to see that collaboration apply once, in the actual process of governing, rather than having to apply at elections to try and get the least good candidate out. And you can see the impact of that across Surrey, the impact of first past the post across Surrey, and particularly in Guildford. In Guildford, 7 out of 10 councillors were chosen by a minority of voters, and across Surrey, it's about half. One councillor was elected on 29% of the votes, which will work out at less than 15% of the electorate. So, the majority of people, generally speaking, don't want the candidate who ends up being elected. So, there's clearly
isn't everything you're saying adding weight to the argument that you have to compromise if you're to maximize your effect under first past the post, and that
yes,
and if you look at it from the GGG point of view, that was also their best chance to win a seat in the Guildford seats, which is why they obviously selected it. So wouldn't it have been more sensible to agree, even if you do have policy issues, which you will have with any of the other parties anyway?
The point,
concede the standing and concede that seat to them.
The point is to, you can call it in generally speaking, it's an anti-conservative vote there. But the point really is on the policies. If we don't agree with a party's policies, we're not going to have that arrangement with them. And there'll be minor differences in some areas, but the further a party is from this core program of progressive policies, the harder it is to work together, the less likely it is that we are going to want to work together.
Okay, but you'd have major
the Green Party.
But you'd have major differences with the Labour Party, for instance, wouldn't you?
Well, far fewer than with GGG ultimately, based at least on their based on their literature, it's quite hard to tell what those policies are. But with the comments made by Ramsey in his interview, it does seem that there are quite broad gaps there that would be very difficult to cover. And okay. There's no, if we hadn't stood in Shear, for example, the Lib Dems would have stood in Shear. We're not going to, we have for too long, I think, been a party that is standing down for good of, or for what we would see as the good of everyone as a whole. And okay. We saw the impact of that the last
that is a good
election.
point. That if you hadn't stood, then the Dems would. Okay, now your party is against, in principle, I think, green belt development. So where should new houses in the Guildford divisions go?
Well, firstly, our sort of the idea really with Guildford is obviously to change the local plan. Our councillor Diana Jones, she sits with the Arthur GV group, and so she will be assisting with that attempt. In particular, we need to be overturning the removal of greenbelt protections from the surrounding villages, which Guildford town centre itself seems to have largely avoided. And also in the town centre, with the change in our work patterns, there'll be a significant case for a lot of office space to be converted. There are, as we know, several areas in Guildford that have been completely vacant in the town centre for years, if not decades. So it'll be exciting to keep a close eye on the Debenhams development on North Street and others coming up to ensure that the homes that are provided there and the buildings fit the character of the area, the living space that's fit for purpose, and with genuinely affordable homes for those who actually need them, rather than buy-to-let investments, and are also as environmentally sustainable as possible, both in construction and use, and also that there's much needed space for people to connect with the river and the wildlife corridor, which is currently very overlooked in the town centre.
Okay, now, so would you prevent any if you had the power, would you prevent any development of the green belt in Guildford Borough across the board?
A complete blanket statement is never going to be helpful. I think every option has to be considered on its own merits, but by and large,
Okay, let me be more
We
specific then. Would you allow the strategic sites, the big sites, Gosden Hill, Wisley, and Blackwell Farm, would you allow those to proceed?
only where, well, essentially, it's almost certainly a no. And GGG have done very good work on the getting the need for those housing updated
Right.
in policy, and that will have an impact on which of these big developments are seen to be needed. And
Okay, now you mentioned that. I mean, there are big question marks being raised about the population projections, but nonetheless, the population is on an upward trend still. How much we don't, is arguable. But given that population is continuing to grow, primarily because of immigration, according to the Office of National Statistics, what would you do about that issue? Isn't population growth globally and nationally a threat to our environment?
well, the impact on the environment is actually a result of two things. It's population versus per person consumption, and currently, at least, it's the consumption that is by far the biggest impact on the environment. The richest 10% of the world produces over 50% of the emissions currently, and the poorest 50% produce about 8% of the emissions. So at the moment, population globally is not the big issue when it comes to emissions. There's obviously other impacts such as the requirements for food, water, things like that. But population globally is not the biggest of those two factors when it comes to the impact on the environment. As for nationally, so we are in the southeast, particularly populated. The same isn't true for the whole of the country. And a readjustment, this is something that comes under national policy more than local policy, a readjustment of investment and of building and better national public transport would enable more of that overpopulation in the southeast and the desire to build in the southeast where it's most profitable to be shifted and shared more fairly around the country, which is what Green Party policy would be pushing for.
Okay, so Surrey County Council is in charge of roads. And if you had been elected, one of the things you'd be dealing with is their policy on roads. Now, what is the Green Party's policy on the roads in Surrey? Do you agree with increasing the road capacity and the level of road maintenance, or because you're going for greener transportation, would you cut back on the roads budget in favour of other forms of transport?
Well, the first thing to recognise is that just building more roads and widening roads doesn't actually reduce traffic long term, and often doesn't actually even reduce traffic short term. Generally speaking, the roads that we've seen, new roads we've seen built in the southeast to relieve traffic, have ended up within a couple of years around 30% busier than they were previously, thanks to a effect. It's the induced demand effect. That's it. So not only is that not a long-term solution in terms of the climate, in terms of building over our greenbelt, it's also not even helping reduce traffic. Things that would help reduce traffic is investment in public transport that's accessible, that's affordable, and that actually does connect local villages and towns where we need them, rather than the routes that are only the routes that are most profitable. We want to see investment in walking and cycling. Those two, walking, cycling, and the public transport, not only are they benefits in and of themselves, they also take more cars off the roads, which causes less damage to the roads. And they have all these knock-on impacts, even down to sort of improving health and therefore reducing healthcare costs, for example. So what we would like to see really is, particularly with the interconnectivity, talking about Shear now, the interconnectivity between local villages and to the main centre, obviously, of Guildford, where a lot of people travel for work or shopping, leisure, whatever. That's where the real investment needs to be. And on the road maintenance, rather than sort of shoddy repairs that are outsourced or subcontracted and re-subcontracted, we want to see the council take more charge over the repairs to ensure that these are done properly, and rather than kicking the budget can down the road by doing the bare minimum, waiting until the road surface is completely ruined before you touch it. It actually spending a bit more in one section of time will actually save everyone money in the long term and give us the roads that or give us a much better quality of roads.
Okay. I'm still not. So would you tell motorists that it's tough and that you're not going to increase the road capacity, even if the number of houses and people increase?
Well, no, firstly, new developments need to be accessible by public transport and need to be, you need to be able to walk and cycle to and from them and within them. And secondly, what we'd like to.
So would you increase the capacity of the A3, for instance, as the Conservatives are hoping to do, to relieve the bottleneck through Guildford, to facilitate more people and more houses? Would you do that?
No, what we'd be telling motorists is that we wouldn't be sort of saying too bad, deal with it. We'd be implementing policy to take the cars off the road in the first place, to reduce the need for, or the purported need to be building more roads. As we've seen, building more roads doesn't actually tend to decrease traffic in the long run, but providing the feasible alternatives to people, because most people don't want to be stuck in traffic in a car for hours every day. I'd say almost no one actually wants that.
But
people want to be able to.
Most households do have cars, so it would
Yes.
require a significant shift, this modal shift that everyone's talked about, for that to be possible, wouldn't it? I.e., for more people without more roads.
Yes, but the provision of feasible alternatives to that already takes a large number of people out of that equation, because most people only have most houses have 2 or 3 cars. The reason is because it's almost impossible to get anywhere around Surrey or even often in Guildford without a car, because of the lack of public transport, because of the lack of safe cycling infrastructure. Oftentimes even pavements aren't even fit to walk on, so you can't really expect.
Okay.
There'll always be some people who want to do that. You do think
modal shift is possible, given the measures you've outlined?
Yes.
Okay. Right. Finally, on taxation, the Green Party's policy is to rationalise local taxation quite extensively, reading your manifesto. I won't go through it now, but do you think that local taxation is an issue in voters' minds? And would you support the localization of fiscal policy? In other words, take off the restrictions on local tax raising so that councils could decide, free of government control, how much tax they need to raise in their areas?
In general, we'd like to see decentralization for local authorities and local decision making generally, and that includes fiscal policies. In particular, we'd like councils to have the ability to set environmental taxes, which are then reinvested in their communities, for example, in schemes like the Guildford Godalming cycleway, which then have knock-on benefits in their communities. And generally speaking, yes, our tax policies aim to replace more regressive taxes, which cost the poorest the most, with progressive taxes. Okay. The point of the tax system is that everyone should be paying a rate that's fair for them.
But do you think that's a vote winner? People don't normally vote for parties that say they're going to increase taxation, do they?
Well, this wouldn't necessarily increase the actual rates of tax being paid. Rationalizing, as you said, simplifying tax systems is is one of our policies, and the ability for when local people see that some a tax is being earmarked, ring fenced for a particular project or a particular aspect of policy, then they're often much happier to not necessarily to pay more, but certainly to pay that tax. For example, most people would support a tax increase if it was ring fenced for the NHS, for example. That's not saying that there is a policy to bring that in, but people understanding where their taxes are going and not assuming that it's going to the pocket of a private business who pays zero tax, or someone who's won a dubious contract, for example. People are much happier to pay that fair rate of tax when they know where it's going and when they can see that there are benefits in that tax for them and for their whole community.
Okay, Sam Peters of the Green Party, thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin.